Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 14th International Cybersecurity Symposium, Digital Cybersecurity for National Security, Economic Security, and Societal Security. The program now resumes with a special session, the Yomiuri International Forum. I would like to turn to our coordinator, Kyoichi Sasazawa, to introduce the session and speakers. Mr. Sasazawa, please.
お時間となりました。皆さんよろしくお願いいたします。
How do you do? In the 14th International Cybersecurity Symposium, we have this special session. We are very grateful for this opportunity. And my name is Kyoichi Sasazawa of Yomiuri newspaper. And I am also in charge of YIES. And we have a certain theme which we pursue each year under the name of the Yomiuri International Conference. We have conferences on that subject. And for the theme for 2024, we are looking at the situation of Japan, mistrust and conflict, and the response capabilities of Japan. And we are looking at the theme of preparedness for cyber attacks today. And at the very beginning, we will have a keynote presentation by Admiral Dennis Blair, former U.S. Director of National Intelligence. And then we will hear from Mr. Kitamura and Professor Tezuka. And we have online distribution for this event. And for today's forum, Yomiuri newspaper and YIES, as well as the Keio University's Cybersecurity Research Center had the Mita Corporation have gathered together to hold this event, as well as with the Keio University Global Research Institute. And we would like to first have a keynote presentation from Admiral Blair. To introduce Admiral Blair, from 2009 to 2010, he had been involved as a director of the national intelligence in the United States, and he has been in the Navy, and until his retirement for 34 years, he had been in the U.S. Navy. And now he's currently in the North Carolina University as a special professor and has been serving in various roles as chairman of various different forums. And now we would like to hear from Admiral Blair.
Well, thank you very much, Sasakawa-san, and very happy to be back in Japan. I lived here with my family in the 1980s and developed a deep affection and respect for Japan and have many friends here, so it's good to be back. But I'm afraid this afternoon I must bring a warning, a message that Japan must take some action against a growing threat, which threatens all of us, like-minded countries that believe in democracy and in free markets and in opportunity for all of our citizens. And that is the threat through cyber means, this wonderful system which enables so many advantages to our lives on a day-to-day basis and to our economies and to our national security forces, but it brings with it tremendous fragility and risk, which we have to deal with at the same time that we enjoy all of the benefits of our smartphones and our TikTok and most of our children and grandchildren use, and the many other business and national security applications. Because the vulnerabilities, the threats from the growing use of the internet and the various devices attached to the internet is growing much more rapidly than is our ability to protect against it. And I'm afraid in Japan, the emphasis on cybersecurity, the actions on cybersecurity are lagging well behind the potential dangers of the threat. And my advice to my friends in Japan is that they must take more urgent action in a direction that they understand, but in which the actual defenses fall short of the threat. Now, what is this threat? There are two primary sources of a cyber threat to Japan, to the United States. The first is from criminal organizations. And the cyber development, all of our finances are on digital means. The operating systems for all of our essential services are on cyber networks. And therefore, the criminals attack us in these networks. They attack businesses, ransomware against hospitals, against other businesses, personal attacks on the property and the money, the savings of many citizens. And this is an entire important area that costs us billions every year, billions of dollars, trillions of yen. And because the criminals use cyber means, it is an international threat. And it's not just Japanese criminals that threaten Japanese citizens. It's not just American criminals that threaten American citizens. It is criminals from anywhere in the world threatening Japanese and American individuals, businesses. The second source of threat are nation states that are hostile to the United States, to Japan, that have disputes with the United States and with Japan. And Japan lives in a very tough neighborhood with China, with North Korea, that have disputes with Japan, and Russia, which also has territorial disputes with Japan, and more importantly, China, Russia, and North Korea also believe in a completely different world order, a completely different set of values from Japan and from the United States. So these nation states, with all the resources of a big government, the people that they can train, the resources that they can spend, are also using that to gain advantage over the United States, to gain advantages over Japan. Everything from stealing intellectual property so that they can compete with Japanese and American businesses, to planting malware in our critical infrastructure systems, so in case of crisis or conflict, they can degrade power systems, financial systems, all of the 14 or 15 critical infrastructures. And what is even more alarming in very recent years is that the criminal organizations and the hostile nation states are cooperating. They are trading techniques. In some cases, hostile nation states, Russia, China, are even working directly with criminal hackers in order to attack the citizens, the businesses, the government, the security forces of Japan and of the United States. So this threat has always been grave, but in recent years it is growing at a very high rate. And yet, the cybersecurity defenses here in Japan are not keeping pace. Now, I have to say that the United States is not perfect ourselves. You read in the paper about breaches of American networks. Most recently, you may have read that Chinese hackers penetrated the networks of our telephone and internet service providers, such as Verizon, AT&T, and they were seeking, and in some cases were successful in gathering the personal communications of some of our presidential candidates and information about about the actions of American police agencies that were attempting to identify and to track criminal threats. And so the United States is not perfect, but I think we awoke to this threat earlier than you have here in Japan. And so we have organized a set of authorities, a set of relationships, and a certain capacity to deal with this threat. And when a breach occurs, when there is a penetration of our networks, we have a mechanism to identify, to patch the flaws in our networks that allowed that penetration in the first place, and to build more strongly for the future. Because that's the only way that we can stay ahead, or we can get ahead in this competition between attack and defense, is to detect, remediate, improve, and stay constantly ahead of the threat, which will always be inventing new attack vectors and making more attacks, because there's such high incentive both to the criminals and to the nation states that are hostile to us. So in the United States, we have organized our authorities within the government, between the government and the private sector, and many of our international relationships, so that we at least have a framework on which we can build capacity to increase our defenses fairly rapidly. And it's this important step of getting organized and then getting to work that Japan must take in the very near term, because the threat is becoming so clear. And it is not that Japanese officials who are familiar with the threat are not taking action, and people like my fellow panelists of former National Security Advisor Kitamura-san and Professor Tezuka, an academic authority here at Keio. It's not that they don't know what needs to be done, they do. Many Japanese experts do, and Japan has many fine experts in this area. And it's not that the politicians are doing nothing. In November of 2022, Japan published an updated national security strategy which recognized the threat clearly and which prescribed steps that Japan needed to take. But it's been 2 years since that strategy, and I don't think the progress has matched the threat. Right now, the Japanese government is working on legislation and policy which will organize the Japan government, the Japan private sector to deal with the threat, but it has to be done quickly. It has to move with urgency. President Xi Jinping of China has ordered not only his military forces, but his entire government to be ready to solve the question of Taiwan by 2027. He does not say that he will attack Taiwan, but he says China must be ready to, and this date, only 2 years away, has given a great deal of energy to activities within China. It has given a great deal of urgency to activities in the United States. Our politicians are aware of that date. All of our military leaders are aware of that date, and we are working very hard to raise our level of deterrence so that when that date comes, it will be clear to the Chinese that they would be unsuccessful in military aggression or cyber aggression. And I think that same sense of urgency must be adopted here in Japan. Japanese territory is very close to Taiwan. Japan has an open dispute with China over the Senkakus. It has an open dispute with Russia over the northern islands, the Kurils. So this is a dangerous neighborhood. There are issues in which your neighbors want to conduct aggression against your interests. I haven't even talked about North Korea, which fired a missile over Japan today, I understand. And so we need to move with urgency. Quickly, what must be done? The first step is to assign these responsibilities within the government and in the relationship between the government and the private sector, and to assign the responsibilities clearly, because it will take the efforts of all the involved parts of the government, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Economic, Trade, and the Ministry of Internal Communications, the National Police Agency. Everybody has a piece of the cyber defense. And so the government must take the lead to tell this team who plays fullback, who plays halfback, who plays forward, what the scheme is, and that needs to be established. And then the relationship with the private sector must be established. We must provide both penalties but also incentives for the private sector to share its knowledge. NTT is battling with Chinese hackers every day. They are in continual assault into the largest IT ISP system in Japan. They have great expertise. So does NEC. So does Docomo. So does TEPCO. So do many of these private companies that are defending the services upon which all Japanese defend. And they must be cooperating with the government, both in terms of reporting and in terms of remediation and in terms of developing talent in order to defend Japan. The work will be done by the cybersecurity experts within the government and within the private sector, and we must make it easy for them to work together to exchange information. My experience is when you put cybersecurity professionals together, either in person or virtually, whether they work for a private cybersecurity center or they work for a government intelligence agency, they can perform magic together very quickly. But they need the structure so that they can trade information, so that they can bring their skills to the common task, so that they can work together. So the challenge is to create that policy and legal framework and create it quickly to allow them to do the good work that they have to do. And then finally, there's the question of human capacity. A cyber security defender is one of the most important assets that a country has for its economic well-being, its social well-being, its national security. And right now, both in the United States and in Japan, we have far too few of them. But I think Japan's deficit in human cybersecurity talent is much larger right now, relatively speaking, than is that of the United States. I tell my friends in the United States, and I think it's true in Japan, if you have children or grandchildren or the children and grandchildren of your friends, tell them to go into the cybersecurity business. They will have satisfying and well-paid jobs for their entire lives. There's a huge demand for it. We need some of the best people working there. So we must develop this talent. Let me just finish by saying that Japanese experts, Japanese civil servants, Japanese military officers, Japanese politicians are very familiar with what Japan must do. The reports that were published this summer by the research committee of the LDP, by the committee of experts, which were convened from outside as well as inside government to advise on the way forward. Those are very fine reports. The roadmap is very clear. It's up to, I think, the Japanese people to put the pressure on their government to take the right action to protect the society, the business, the national security of this country, and it's up to the politicians to take the votes, implement the authorities, allocate the resources so that Japan can secure its networks and still enjoy all of the amazing benefits of the information technology revolution, which is making our lives so much better and has the prospect of making them even better still. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Admiral Blair. In regard to what is lacking in Japan, there has been points raised. And so, this is a good starting point for our discussions. I'm sure that you're familiar with the panelists, but there are participants online, so I would like to introduce the two Japanese speakers. First, on the left-hand side, we have Professor Satoru Tezuka of the Keio University Global Research Institute. He's a project professor, and he graduated the Faculty of Engineering of Keio University. And he entered Hitachi Limited, and then he had been a professor of the Tokyo Institute of Technology, and then in 2016 he came to Keio University, and in 2024, in regard to the Minister's Award of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, there has been an award provided to him, and he has gone through various committees. Next to him is Shigeru Kitamura. He was a former director of National Security Council, and in 1980 he graduated the Faculty of Law of the University of Tokyo and entered National Police Agency and entered the Cabinet Secretariat. And he was the former director of National Security Council, and he has been awarded for various efforts that has been made. He's written books on his police activities, and he has been involved in YIES. I would like to request for your best regards. Now, in regard to the keynote presentation by Admiral Blair, we would like to ask the two panelists about their impressions. Professor Tezuka, if you have any impressions you'd like to share with us as well as questions you'd like to raise, let us deal with them. How do you do? My name is Tezuka of Keio University. And since yesterday, this venue has been used for the 14th International Cybersecurity Symposium. And here, the Yomiuri newspaper wanted to collaborate with us to hold an international conference. This is quite a revolutionary thing, but I was making the arrangements for Keio University, and we are very grateful for this opportunity, so I would like to express my gratitude. Now, in regard to the points raised by Admiral Blair, there were different points that has been made. In our international symposium, what we are trying to do is to cover the subject of digital cybersecurity for national security, economic security, and societal security. That's the title. In other words, ultimately, the default aspect is digital. How are we going to be able to deal with national security, economic security, and societal security? How can we map it? If we take that outlook, then it's necessary for us to understand what the situation that Japan is facing. And there is the relationship with the United States. And under the alliance between the United States and Japan, in all aspects, we have to establish things on an equal footing. Otherwise, we will not have an equal alliance relationship. And under these circumstances, what about the situation of digital? And 2 years ago, Admiral Blair came to Japan and met with Diet members and politicians and has talked about what phenomena has occurred. And from Admiral Blair, the situation that Japan is in, especially in regard to cyber matters, was pointed out as being very weak. He was very frank, and we appreciated his words tremendously. And it is like the second arrival of the black ships. And it can be referred to as the Blair shock. But under these circumstances, we were able to get the keynote presentation from Admiral Blair. So under these circumstances, what must Japan do? From my standpoint, it's necessary to look at Ukraine. It's a very tragic thing, but there is much that we can learn from the situation in Ukraine, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. To what extent a solid defense can be carried out is a very important thing. As you know, in 2014, there was the annexation of Crimea, and there was hybrid warfare that was carried out. And there was a major power failure, and electricity could not be provided at all. That affected all lifelines. However, when it comes to 2022, when the invasion took place in the 14th of February, that did not happen. And that's a most important point. When we think about that, for Japan, if a similar circumstance occurs, solid defense has to be carried out here. In order to do that, what must be done? And on a daily basis, we are in contact with Admiral Blair to learn from him. Under these circumstances, taking advantage of the opportunity of this conference, we're able to hear each other's thoughts. and we can take a comprehensive approach. And ultimately, it's necessary to decide what the Japan way of doing things should be. And to be a true ally of the United States requires this kind of effort. What I'd like to ask Admiral Blair is that we need to establish such a relationship, but what is the position that Japan is currently placed in? That's a question which I would like to make. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。それでは
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the two questions at the same time. So I'd like to ask Kitamura-san first to share his comment and also ask question to Admiral Blair. Today, Admiral Blair is here and also Professor Tezuka is here. And I feel so happy and also honored that I can be with them. Admiral Blair used to be the director of the U.S. National Intelligence, so he is senior to me. And during I was working for the national security, I have been having a relationship with him. And today we are talking about the cybersecurity, and we are so happy to discuss about on that theme. Professor Tezuka mentioned about this. The Admiral Blair gave very enlightening and awakening comment about our cybersecurity posture. And I was in central government, so I know it is rather late and slow, but I would like to share what's taking place right now in the government. As Admiral Blair pointed out, there are several important issues. Professor Tezuka touched upon the Ukraine, and then that changed our really mindset. February 24th, Russia invaded into Ukraine, and that is the official date. But when you think of the destructive cyber attack, it was January 13th and then 14th. A very massive cyber attack started already. So what can we draw from that phenomena? The modern war has changed. The physical war, before the physical war, they started attacking the critical infrastructure in the cyberspace. And then that was what happened in Ukraine, and then that is the type of modern war. So the cyber attack is the first step of the modern war. Meanwhile, Japan, we must defend our critical infrastructure, and I think the Ukraine war gave us a warning about it. And today I'd like to talk about the scheme and a mechanism of the protection of the infrastructure. 2022 May, we had a law to promote the economic security, and that law stipulates the protection of the critical infrastructure. If there is any abnormal phenomena, then the national government can intervene. So that was the first time that now national government can intervene in the critical infrastructure. And also whether there is any suspicious parts or risky parts are utilized in the critical infrastructure. Now, we have a framework that the government can also check that. And another point is that let's say government receives some information from the U.S. government, such as about the malware or some signature to identify them. then the critical infrastructure operator must also receive that information. And I'm sure that we have to cover many stakeholders. And we also, this year, May, the law was enacted. This is about the protection and also use of the critical security information. And as Admiral Blair and also Tezuka-san mentioned, that protection is not enough when attacks takes place or when we see the symptoms or precursor of the attacks. We must be able to monitor them and have to really protect the presence of the nation. And we have to think of the deterrence to protect the nation. And you may say, why are you talking about it? It is natural things to do. But we do not have a mechanism to talk about deterrence. 2023 December, the new National Security Strategy Initiative, Active Cyber Defense, was mentioned, and it stipulates that we have to have a mechanism to promote active cyber defense for the first time. So what do we need to do in the cyberspace? There is no way that only one ministry can achieve this. No. We have to have a cooperation in many ways. There are 3 points. One is that the cybersecurity related authorities, law enforcement authorities, defense ministry, and also MIC, there are many stakeholders. And all the stakeholders must cooperate each other regardless of the borders of the ministries. And they are working together, but there is no control tower for that. So we have to have some control organization. And that has been mentioned in this strategy. The second point is that the public and private partnership in this national security strategy. Against this, June this year, we held a special meetings and established a council for cyber security system. And in August, they produced some pillars about the national security strategy. So the second pillar was that public and private sector partnership. And if there are any vulnerability found in the system, in the vendors, then that information should be also treated by the government too. And also when the incident takes place, private company must report the incident to the government. So information sharing, and also we have to have some mechanism to do so. We will be discussing all these points further in the future, but we need to have international cooperation, especially when it comes to cyberspace. This space, incident does not happen only in one nation, because telecommunication is in cyberspace. Admiral Blair may mention this, but in the Atlantic Ocean, the NSA and also GCHQ, both US and UK, are protecting the gateway of the Atlantic. As for Pacific Ocean, US is in east coast, but the west side, Japan, And do we have capability, or do we have a legal framework? I don't think that we have a legal framework or capability to really work with the U.S. to protect the Pacific Ocean. Abe, Suga, and Kishida administration, there had been a lot of efforts made for the national security. As Professor Tezuka said, that the U.S.-Japan alliance must be enhanced, and all the efforts were made to really make these alliances functioning. Even in cyberspace, we have to have the cooperation between U.S. and Japan in Pacific region, and we have only a midterm report, but active cyber defense, we really have to make efforts, and we have to make the law to enable the active cyber defense, and it is an urgent issue.
どうもありがとうございました。非常にですね、お二方とも非常に興味深かったんですけど、一応その質問があったらブレアさんの方にちょっとお尋ねするということ。
We have had very good comments, and we would like to have the question posed to Admiral Blair. And what is the position that Japan is in terms of the rest of the world? In regard to ranking, what is the ranking of Japan? What is the actual capability of Japan? That's something which we would like to ask about.
So it's always tempting to talk about rankings. People love to know who's at the top of the table, who's at the bottom of the table. And when I was here 2 years ago, I said that if this were baseball, Japan's cybersecurity would be in the minor leagues. They would not be in the major leagues. A lot has happened in those 2 years, as you heard from Kitamura-san, in terms of thinking about the structure. But in actual on-the-ground capability, I think that Japan's progress in these last 2 years has been falling behind the threat, the rising criminal threat, the rising Chinese, Russian, North Korean threat, and Japan is just as far behind the threat as they were 2 years ago. And that's really the important measure. Each country's national security and cybersecurity must depend on the level of the threat. I would say the top cyber-secure countries in the world right now are in the Baltics, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. Why? Because they've been subject to massive attacks across their infrastructure, across their social media, across their government agencies from a very capable Russian security service. And they have developed the defensive capabilities just as Ukraine developed them very rapidly, as Tezuka Sensei told us. So if you are attacked and you suffer massive outages, you tend to react and get better and move up into the major leagues. The big challenge, especially in a democracy, is to take action early before you have a massive attack that causes great suffering and great loss. I mean, in the United States, the issue was terrorism. We knew about Osama bin Laden. Some people in government were working on it, but we just did not comprehend until it happened the damage that could occur from a small group of dedicated zealots who were willing to sacrifice their lives and turn airplanes into weapons. And then, of course, after the fact, we spent hundreds of billions of dollars to raise our security against the terrorist threat. If we had spent a fraction of that money before 9/11, if we had organized our government agencies to share information, to work together, to work with our international partners, we could have prevented that attack. We could have been safe. So the challenge, both in the American democracy and in the Japanese democracy, is to do take these actions against threats that we understand intellectually and we see some examples of, both in our own country and around the world, and take that action when it's less expensive, when it will prevent attacks, rather than going back after some massive attack and having to pick up the pieces and to spend so much money. So you will always do the right thing after the tragedy happens, but I think the test of our democracies and our leadership and the people putting pressure on the leadership is to take these prudent actions ahead of time and prevent them from happening. If people write articles in 5 years saying, Japan took all this action, spent all this money, and there was no attack, I say good, we succeeded. So let not complacency and the lack of major damage right now prevent Japan and my country working together with other like-minded countries from taking those actions to prevent it from happening and causing so much suffering to all of our people.
はい、ありがとうございます。私も
Thank you very much. I had read newspapers articles on this about the fact that Japan is considered as being in the minor league and things seem not to have changed that much over the past 2 years. That's a tough comment. But if we look at this situation of various areas, then I think that we must abandon ourselves to being told such things. But in regard to what's lacking, the next question is what needs to be done. And first of all, I'd like to ask Kitamura-san, what are the actual changes that are taking place? Or if you could touch upon such aspects, that would be appreciated, Mr. Kitamura. I've already touched upon the interim efforts, but when it comes to cyber attacks, in the space that we live in, we don't see cyber attacks taking place. There are underwater cables and so on where data is flowing, and that is where cyber attacks occur. So currently, it's impossible, but within data, it's necessary to look at where malicious activities take place, and when that occurs, how do we deter things? So monitoring, and also in regard to the aspect of neutralization, those are the two aspects that are important. Since we're involved with information communication technology, there is also the secrecy of communications that exist. And in that regard, in regard to the collection of data, there is Article 35 of the Japanese Constitution. And there is currently debate on such aspects. However, if we look at reality, when it comes to cyber attacks, there are numerous attacks that are taking place simultaneously. And so if we try to get a warrant and try to carry out deterrence for each, there's the question about that. And in regard to the interim report by the experts, it's not realistic to think that it'll be possible to do that. And so if there is some crisis of the very existence of a nation, or if it may endanger the lives and perhaps the wealth of individuals, the authority for some level of intervention seems to be appropriate to carry out neutralization activities. And in regard to the contents of communications, there's the aspect of metadata that identifies the type of information. And furthermore, there may be information coming from overseas, and these things may be targeted. And the report has covered such aspects. But basically, there's a necessity to check all types of traffic in a mechanical manner.
And the secrecy of communication must be breached. So we have some articles and then of the communication provider. So under certain conditions, it is possible for government or authority to monitor the communication, and that have to be included into the law. But monitoring of the communication and also neutralizations, Article 35, you really have to study how to incorporate this. Under Article 35, some conditions is that in the expert report, there is a possibility to use this law. This is the one sections to check the belongings of a person. Without warrant, the authority can search belongings of the certain individual without having a search warrant. And we have a freedom of communication, and when authority to neutralize certain attack, and it may violate the freedom of the telecommunication or communication, and you must have some third-party or third-party organization to check whether that action was not really violating the privacy law. So secrecy of communications and then privacies and also national securities, the experts discussed on all these different issues from different aspects. And I hope that this is going to be the basis for creating a scheme. Thank you. Then Professor Tezuka, you who want to discuss about the technological side of this. Kitamura-san mentioned about things about the laws and rules, and I quite agree with him. But as I said from the beginning, how do we make use of digital technology? I really recommend automatic reaction or automatic scheme. So that's why we need to use AI. To make safe and secure society, you need to have the digital technology. But before that, Admiral Blair said that we are still in minor league, and he's so nice. he's so sweet expressing that way. But I call myself a Japanese little league, not the minor league. We are in a little league. So Japan learned from other countries' situation and created the strategies. So now it's time for us to come up with tactics. So it's up to countries' culture, regulations, policies. Now we are in the phase of creating tactics. But this is the most difficult phase. Admiral Blair said it's kind of too late, too slow. So how Japan should really work on devising tactics. And Kitamura-san said that we have to study the rules and laws and institutions and operations and then technologies. And unless we come up with real operations and real technology to use, you cannot implement it. So now technologists must participate in this discussion. So even in this symposium, digital cybersecurity is a word that I recommend to use. So there are 3 points that government should really work on. Government should create the world-class government cloud. And based on that, cyber intelligence system should be created even in a peaceful time, not just for emergency, but even in a peaceful time, you must have this operation. You can't do the attribution unless you practice during the peaceful time. And as Kitamura-san said, we have to implement the active cyber defense system with laws. And it is a national security. And one more thing which is important is economic security. Critical infrastructure system, how to protect the critical infrastructure. And again, we need to have appropriate laws and regulations. But then again, digital systems should be the basis for that. Otherwise, people cannot get powers, people cannot communicate, people cannot ride trains, people cannot withdraw money from ATM, or you cannot go to hospitals. So when that happens, then even though we have a good institutions or laws, we cannot really do anything unless we have tactics. Therefore, for the future, the Japanese best talents should get together to devise tactics and combine that with digital systems. And that is the thing that we have to do now. As Admiral Blair said, U.S.-Japan alliance, we have to have some type of digital agreement, digital technology agreement. And Five Eyes should connect to this framework so that we can create solid and strong cyberspace of Japan.
May I add one comment, please? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. It is not my place to advise Japanese friends about their own constitution, but I cannot believe that the Japanese Constitution intends to prevent Japan from gathering information about hostile intention of its enemies. Japanese Constitution, like the American Constitution, should defend the human rights of its citizens. It should defend the privacy, the right to privacy of its own citizens, but it should charge its government to gather information outside of Japan, again, about the intentions and capabilities of countries which threaten Japan's interests. The problem with cyber is that it confuses many of these traditional physical separations that we can make between gathering information overseas and gathering information with our own country, because the global nature of the internet brings together or erases these international boundaries. What do you do if two Chinese spies are using NTT email accounts to talk to each other? Do they have a right of privacy because they're using a Japanese system? What do you do when Russian spies are using botnets in Japan to spread disinformation, political disinformation, to influence Japanese politics and policy? Do they have a right to privacy because they are using Japanese servers, Japanese ISPs? So these are the old way of thinking of a line at the border, and Japanese citizens have protection within that border. The police must get warrants before they can listen to their communications. The courts have great authority. These are erased by cyber. But they should not erase the basic principle that the government has a responsibility to gather information about potential enemies so that action can be deterred or, if necessary, defended against. So I think we need to keep the basics in mind while we talk about these constitutional issues. I will say that these same issues are of great concern in the United States, and we do not have perfect answers. We have some combination of the role of the courts, the role of independent inspectors general, the role of audits, the role of our Congress to investigate in order to ensure that our security agencies are not violating the right to privacy, the human rights of American citizens. So as Japan wrestles with these problems, I think it will come up with its own solutions. And frankly, I don't think any country that I know of has a perfect answer, and we would welcome Japanese participation or Japanese development of new concepts, new techniques that we can all learn from. Which brings me to one more point, which is the nature of the US-Japan alliance. When I first became involved in US-Japan relations, it was a very unequal alliance. The United States took the lead. Japan provided support, took very much a secondary role. That has changed in recent years. I would say from about 2012, 2014, Japan, the United States was concentrating on operations in the Middle East, on countering terrorism. Japan very much took the lead within the alliance on many concepts of common defense. And that relationship has stayed much more equal than it was in the past. And I think in cybersecurity, there also must be an equal role here, and that Japan needs to increase its cybersecurity for its own purposes, and then cooperate with the United States to increase our common cybersecurity so that there are not weaknesses in one country that can be used against the other country. But I think that Japan has great technical skills. It has good conceptual skills. It is right now grappling with the tough issues of cybersecurity. It needs to move fast, maybe break things, fix them, improve, and be an active partner in this alliance at cybersecurity as it has become in so many other aspects of our common security alliance.
ありがとうございます。そういう
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting subject that we're discussing, and there has been many political matters that have come up. But I would like to ask this question. We now have the US presidential elections coming up next week. The elections will be held next week. And what about cyber attacks against the presidential elections? What is the situation there? And what is the kind of deterrence or countermeasures that are being taken? I was personally interested in this, and so Admiral Blair, if you could touch upon that situation, and if you have any information in that regard, that would be appreciated.
Right, well, I've been gone from government for about 13 years now, so I'm not playing an active role, but I still have my successors who are in these positions of responsibility, and in fact, there's been pretty wide press reporting within the United States about this. And in 2016, Russia undertook a concerted campaign to try to influence the US election in favor of candidate Donald Trump because they thought that it would be to Russia's advantage for him to be the American president rather than Hillary Clinton. That is absolutely true. They attempted. Whether the Russian activities, which involved setting up false influencers, putting out false TikTok, at that time Facebook, at that time Twitter reports, actually influenced the elections decisively is the more important question, and I think the answer is probably not. They did not have a decisive influence. However, this was the first round of hostile countries attempting to influence our politics. In 2018, the US government mobilized all of its cyber resources, Department of Homeland Security, National Security Administration, and the Department of Defense. We were prepared for Russia to try again to influence our midterm elections, and we were very successful in detecting the attempts by Russia in shutting down many of the sites that they would establish in order to put out false information, and then in actually going further into these Russian networks and taking action again closer to the point of origination of the attacks. This is active defense. This is going outside of patching your networks and taking bots off the air. This is going into the people who are making these attacks, and they were later identified publicly. And in 2020, Russia continued to try, and in 2020, we were quite successful in stopping them. Now, in 2024, we read that not only Russia but China is still attempting to influence our political campaigns, and they have developed some sophistication in these approaches. It's not simply sending out phony messages that say, candidate Harris did this bad thing, candidate Trump did this good thing. They are simply attempting to exacerbate the existing divisions within American society, within the political arena. They are taking advantage of, for example, in my home state of North Carolina, taking advantage of the damage done by Hurricane Helene to try to spread and amplify false information that the response to the hurricane was inadequate, or it neglected certain people, or it was designed to have a political purpose. So anything that the Russian and Chinese agents of influence can try to put in to create divisions, to create anger in society, they will try to do. And as we know, this is what harms a democracy. So that is what the situation is in the United States. The situation in Taiwan is even worse. Taiwan is closer. China has more access, and the intensity of these misinformation attacks is even higher. I don't see much discussion of this in here in Japan. You just had an election. I don't know. I would assume that China would be attempting to influence Japanese politics to its advantage. And it's pretty simple. You try to discredit the politicians who take the strongest anti-Chinese stance. You try to build up the politicians who seem to be less antagonistic to China. This is not rocket science. And I must believe that China is attempting to do the same thing here in Japan, and Japan will have to take these same sort of messages to defend its political life, which is the foundation of our representative system, just as it has to defend its critical infrastructure and its classified information and its military capability.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So it is very interesting to learn about these things. But when listening to your discussion, Japan is not doing enough, but we don't have enough human resources. We don't have enough talent. That's again the key factor for the future. We are talking about the minor league, little league, but we can develop the people step by step. So to gain more capability, we must develop people. We must collect talent. So why don't we talk about the talent now? Professor Tezuka, maybe you can start about the human resources. Yes, we are at the university, so it is our responsibility to develop people. The people who can work right away, and also there is another area. We have to develop the people very gradually, but make it to the bigger talent. As for the rapid countermeasures, U.S.-Japan system, I think that it is similar to that U.S.-Japan alliance system. We can develop our own people, but we can work with like-minded countries, and we can get the skilled people right away. I think that is a scenario that we have to write. And another one is we internally develop the people, which means that the education system itself. When I look at Japanese education system, the IT education is weak. The Japanese people are good at mathematics and multiplication. The Indian people can go up to 100 to 100, but in Japan, all the children remember multiplication tables. And as long as you know this, then you can calculate very quickly. In the elementary school and junior high school, we really have to teach IT, information technology, to the younger children. And higher education, high school and in universities, at the Keio University, we provide cyber-related education at SFC, but we don't have many universities which have cyber space program in their curriculum. So we need to increase the people who learn about the information technology. So even the liberal arts students must learn about it. So it is ideal to really educate the people. And if we want to have the skilled people right now, we have to use the public-private partnership. So government, private sector, and academia must work together to make use of skilled people. When I look at U.S. situation, I'm impressed that the American military people are receiving great education, and then they go into the private sector and become a CISO. So if you can do that, then the both public and then private sector can enjoy highly skilled people. But due to the different culture we have, we really have to think about how to develop people. But we need to create an ecosystem. That's a must. Therefore, the government, private sector, and then academia must create the ecosystem. Thank you. So, social situation, Kitamura-san, maybe you can talk about talent too. Current public servant situation. When you think about the current public servant systems, I think that it is rather difficult to hire very capable people. I am working in the private sector right now, but the conditions are so different between the public servants and the private sector employees. So people with special expertise and skills must be exchanged between the public organization and also the private sectors. In the past, each ministry raised people in their own turf, but the skilled people leave the ministry and then start working for the private sector. So you really have to incentivize the people who can get closer to the decision-making organization. So first, you start working for the public sector, but now you can go to the private sector to learn about what's going on and then go back to the public sector. Especially in cyberspace, that's very important. When it comes to public and private partnership, private sector must really work on their platform with their capabilities, and you have to have a good agreement between the public and private sector about the confidential information or sensitive information. And also, I'd like to talk a little bit different things. Admiral Blair mentioned about the national security. Maybe Japan is not incentivized about the making a strong national security. The secrecy of communication. As for the disclosure of the metadata, at the Supreme Court judged that the telecommunication company does not have to disclose the metadata. And as for cyber attacks, 15 specified social infrastructure operators, but the regional large hospitals do not belong to that infrastructure. But in case of emergency, first, these large hospitals are targeted, and we see rampant attacks to these hospitals in regional areas. So, as Admiral Blair said, that the national security is related to the existence of the nation. But even before that, the national security is to protect the people who live in the country.
May I add one thing, Sasuke-san?
Yes.
Let me just try to paint the picture of how a cyber defense team actually works and what the feeling is. So it's 9 a.m. in Beijing, and the Chinese hackers are coming to work. So that is 10 p.m. in the United States, and the American defense team comes to work. And defense team in the cyber command in the United States sits down at a screen that is monitoring activities on the networks of, let's say, one of our government security networks. And if you look at that team, there will usually be one older civilian, very experienced person. There will be an Army sergeant, short haircut, camouflage uniform, very straight posture. There will be one young woman who has earrings, tattoos. She has a baseball hat on backwards, and she'll be part of the team. And they'll take turns at the keyboard. They will see what the Chinese attacker is doing. They'll say, that's Wen Yongfeng. We saw him last week. He must be over the flu that he got last week, because he's back online. We can see where he's going. Let's see if we can direct him over to this honeypot, where we can gather information on him. It's very much a personal, interactive fight that's taking place in cyberspace, and the skills of people with lots of experience, people with young ideas, people with the mental agility of the young, get together because of the mission into the most effective team. And what unites them is patriotism. They're angry that this Chinese hacker is trying to influence American elections. They want to stop it. They want to put all of their skill on it. Some of them may have master's or doctorate degrees in computer science. Some of them may not have finished college. Some of them may not even have finished high school. They taught themselves, but they have the skills. And that's what we really need to put these teams to defend the security of our networks, which is defending the security of our country and of our citizens. And that's what the sort of new approach to cybersecurity that we need to develop in our own countries. And I think Japan has plenty of talent to form those teams. They need some education. They need to learn on the job. There are wonderful initiatives in Yokosuka by the Ministry of Defense and by other Japanese IT companies to put education institutions, research institutions side by side to bring these young people and more experienced people together for the common mission of defending the country. And it just there needs to be more of it. It needs to be faster. It needs to be incentivized. It needs to be rewarded. Its value needs to be seen. And Japan can defend itself and contribute to the alliance which we all share.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. We've talked about talent management, and I think that this is a very good conclusion. We're running out of time, but we've heard of very intimidating situations, but in regard to coexistence in digital society and how to build a brighter future, perhaps for 1 minute each, can we get a comment from each of the panelists? First of all, Admiral Blair, in regard to coexistence in digital society or living in digital society with a sense of security, could you give us a few words on this subject?
Okay, this is the lightning round, right? I don't want to leave this panel with a sense of pessimism, because I believe that the fundamental human talent in both of our countries, the democratic systems we have, which emphasize the importance of people, the importance of rule of law, the importance of defending themselves, is adequate to the task. If you look at history, when representative governments, when the threat is completely clear, they do what they have to do, and over history and time, they have endured and prevailed. They are not as good at doing the right thing ahead of time before it's clear. And so I think our challenge is for Japanese people, American people, to put the pressure on their political systems to produce security, and then for Japanese leaders, American leaders, to perhaps take the people further along this path than they are comfortable with and do the right thing ahead of time and keep our country safe so that we can have the rights and opportunities and good life that we all seek for ourselves and our children. So I think Japan and the United States working together can have a secure and prosperous and fulfilling future, and we just need to get on with it. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。それでは次北村さんにもお願いできますでしょうか。
Mr. Kitamura, when talking about 2010, there was a collision of a fishing vehicle with a self-defense forces maritime vessel, and there was a case where there was some tampering of what was written in the websites by hackers. And in regard to Senkaku in 2011, When it comes to CCTV, there was news that was conveyed about the vessels entering the area, and there were major naval maneuvers that took place. But those were all false news. When it comes to cybersecurity, and in the area of cyber, there are people who want to manipulate news. It's not just people with malicious intent. There is psychological warfare that is carried out by nations. And there are cases where they are looking at the manipulation of information for national purposes directed against other countries like Japan. And we must not be confused by such efforts. And so it's necessary to involve the mass media as well. But in regard to information, proper fact-checking must be carried out. That's one thing. And also in a cyber society, it's necessary to lead healthy lives. And so we need to have information literacy fostered among the people of the nation. Those are all the comments I have. Finally, Professor Tezuka. Since I will have to summarize things because I'm going to be the final commentator here. But from my position, what I'd like to stress is that in our country, we still have paper as the default culture, but we have to switch to digital. That's the most important thing. What happens then? It's a digital thing, and so ultimately, we need to have interoperability and connectivity, and there must be ultimately trust. So we have to look at what level things have to be thought out. In a social infrastructure, this is going to be very important. For example, if you look at the stamps, then there's a lot of stamps that are used here in Japan for banks and so on.
That's a Japanese practice, but the stamp itself, it's interoperability. You can press the stamp, but when you put the stamp and the power of that stamp, can we really trust that stamp? And that is also the same as cybersecurity's trust. Whether you use your real authentic stamp or just the regular stamp, so you have a different level of trust according to the stamp that you use. And we communicated the word society 5.0, data-driven era. So 20th century was the era of oil, but 21st century is the era of data. So that's a very important point for us. And the Prime Minister Abe at the Davos, he communicated data-free flow of trust, DFFT. And this trust is a key word for Japan. So we really have to do the fact-checking of the information, and also we have to work on the trustworthiness of the data. You have to migrate into the automated system. Safe information flow in that trustworthy network and processed by AI, and provide the happiness and the well-being of the people. And I think that is very important. So in case of trust, that we have lots of discussion. Zero trust is the base idea of how to increase the trust. It is a very positive way of doing things. Thank you very much. I think we have concluded the session in a very positive note. So this is the end of today's forum. Tomorrow, November the 1st, Yomiuri newspaper will be carrying this article, and November the 9th, Saturday, Yomiuri newspaper will carry special feature of this forum. I hope that you will read it. Thank you very much. This concludes the Yomiuri International Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our coordinator and to all of our panelists.